Hi, Piper. I don't know if you saw them in the chat, but there are two questions from Andrea. The first one is from Maya, and she was asking, how do perennial crops and grains integrate with the Farm Bill and soil and regenerative farming?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think in terms of perennial crops in general, it's a similar situation, at least in the Farm Bill, to agroforestry, where there is actually, I think just last year, NRCS added a conservation practice standard for perennial crops in the same way that exists for agroforestry practices. However, again, because it's up to states to determine what is eligible for funding and what they prioritize, I'm not sure to what extent that support is realized. In terms of perennial grains, I mean, I think it's just personally a fascinating area of research that's led primarily by the Land Institute. So would encourage, yeah, just looking into the work that they're doing. It sounds like you are probably aware. But I think perennialization has enormous potential. For similar reasons to agroforestry, right? Part of the reason that agroforestry is so powerful as a shift in land management is because of the perennial nature of trees. And if we could grow food that was also perennial and did not need to be disturbed and replanted every year, then the soils across the country would be transformed. In terms of exploring new opportunities, particularly, again, I'm mostly on the agroforestry mindset right now. The Savannah Institute is one of the partners that we work really closely with and is one of the leading organizations just doing a ton of amazing work regarding agroforestry demonstration, policy advocacy, working with producers and doing direct technical education and assistance. And I know that they do have an apprenticeship program for folks interested in learning to be agroforestry practitioners. And so if that interests you, can also share that as one perennial avenue.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty new to the game here, everyone. I've just reached midlife and realized there's got to be more to this than corporate America. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. But yes, I did recently find out about the whole perennial grain thing and Kernza and all that. And I'm like, what? That's so cool. Like here in Iowa, we could actually be like doing good. I mean, I'm not saying that our current farmers aren't doing good, but we could kind of be the center of good change. So I would like to be a part of that movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Empower to you. I think that because especially the perennial grain world is like still kind of burgeoning and young, there's a lot of ways for I'm sure that the folks who are in that space want the fields. They would encourage the fields to grow. And so what I'm trying to say is I think that there are definitely opportunities to get involved and start implementing what is available.
And I will also add, I think Jules mentioned it in the chat as well, but we also have a mentorship program available to folks across the Midwest called Harvesting Our Potential. And that pairs you with farmers that have a few, like around 10 or so seasons under their belt. And that mentorship could also provide a little bit more space for folks that are newer to the game. And yeah, more of that on the ground experience and perspective. So lots of really wonderful apprenticeship opportunities to kind of break into between, Savannah Institute, Practical Farmers of Iowa here in the Midwest, and Harvesting Our Potential, which is a program we run. So Andrea, there's myriad opportunities for you to jump in wherever feels right. So
I will get that filled out now.
Awesome. So I have a question that kind of brings us out and looks at things from maybe a bird's eye view, which is that helps maybe bring people into the conversation around advocacy a bit more. And I'm just curious, especially because with agroforestry and pollinator habitat and beneficial insect habitat, what would you suggest for people that are looking to make good change to do if they have the time to engage with your work? Like what is the place that maybe moves the needle the most with the work that you all are doing?
Was this a question for the group,
Yes,
Piper?
sorry,
Okay.
for Sarah and Maya. Like in terms of beneficial insect habitat adoption or agroforestry work, is there a specific place either on the ground or in policy that you think people could have the greatest impact, like at this moment in the Farm Bill?
I can't speak to anything intimately in terms like I don't know specific bills or things going on, but I do know that that's always something that we're throwing in there. But I will say that we've reintroduced the Monarch Act, which is really specific to Western monarchs, with the help of a representative from California. So that we had a press release about that in late June. And then there's new legislation that would help establish USDA label for pollinator safe plants from Senator Jeff Merkley out of Oregon. Jeff Merkley is like an amazing policy maker, partner of ours, who is really passionate about monarchs and a lot of things. There's some controversy with that bill in terms of the idea sounds wonderful. Being able to say that the plant materials that you're purchasing are free of insecticides, but there are concerns within the industry that smaller companies, smaller vendors may not be able to compete with these large companies that have more resources and funding available to really make that happen. But those are bills that are being introduced that are recent that I'm aware of. And then at a state level for Iowa, no. Not a whole lot going on in terms of the environment locally here.
I can also jump in just because I know agroforestry, if you're in the agroforestry world, it's like your whole world, but if you're not, it can be something that you haven't heard of really at all. And so if agroforestry is something that's new to you, something I've really been enjoying doing, at least in the place where I live, is just paying a little bit more attention to the trees that fruit near me. And I've noticed that there are a lot in DC, you know, we have a lot of urban trees. We're very lucky to have a lot of urban green space. And it's been amazing to see that there are peach trees in the park across the street from me. And that is agroforestry in practice, right? Whether there's a community garden, whether you know, you can engage with producers directly who are practicing these things, but also just yeah, just noticing a little bit more is something that I found really rewarding and also really like personally exciting about agroforestry. And so just, yeah, encourage folks to enjoy what that feels like. And also the two bills that I know of that are related to agroforestry are the ones that I talked about. I haven't heard yet, at least of any others that are focused on agroforestry for the upcoming Farm Bill. But as those come out, yeah, would totally appreciate y'all's support on them, or just, you know, drumming up any kind of excitement, talking to folks about them, I think is going to do a lot of good. And so we'll follow up with Piper as those bills are introduced and start to get moving in Congress, at least at the federal level. And because I primarily work at the federal level, I have less to say on the state and local level outside of just enjoying the trees around you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that. And I also would add that Sarah added some information to the chat about how to become an ambassador with the Xerces Society as a volunteer. And so that is another possible way to start to take note of the world around you. I think is a really beautiful way to think about our relationship to pollinators and our relationship to agroforestry systems as well. And to know that those are things that are not novel, like we get to see them all the time. And maybe now you have some words to attach to what you're seeing a little better. But yeah, thank you both for diving into questions about kind of how to be moving through the world and thinking about these parts of your work as they relate to policy.
Yeah. Can I say something real quick, Piper?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Jump in.
So Maya totally got I was like, ooh, I like this direction she's going. So, and also kind of thinking about the ambassador program. So that's basically equipping individuals to be able to do their own education and outreach within their communities. And it's really that peer-to-peer conversations that we have every day with, the people in our communities that I think can really help move the needle forward, get people interested, get them excited about conservation, about what's going on around them, and maybe empowering to do some change locally. It's, we talk a lot about federal stuff, but there is so much going on within cities and counties and states too. So maybe it feels a little easier to go ahead and start at a smaller local level. I will also say that we have a Bee City initiative and a Bee Campus initiative where basically if you have let's say you already have a coalition of people within your community where you're like, I wish we had more trees. I wish we had pollinator habitat. You can become a Bee City and there's kind of some red tape that you have to go through, but you can put, habitat within, you have that namesake, you get the glory, but you do one education outreach event a year. You try to reduce pesticides, come up with an integrated pest management plan, and put in some pollinator plantings. Maybe you already have pollinator plantings, but you can expand on those. So there are a number of different ways. And of course, I'm just speaking about Xerces Society things, but there's probably a lot of other avenues wherever you may be within the US or beyond. But really, I think having conversations with people and connecting people to the outdoors can make a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And I think, Sarah, you gave us a beautiful segue into my next question, which kind of relates to urban areas. I think agroforestry and pollinator habitat building and reconstruction both are places and avenues that allow for a bit more of the urban implementation than maybe like cover crops or buffer strips in our conventional systems of conservation work in like row cropping. And so I'm curious if there are any particular provisions, and you kind of touched on these just now and with your PFI beneficial insects work that you're doing, but are there any provisions or goals that either Carbon 180 or Xerces have around supporting urban agroforestry and like pollinator habitat in urban spaces respectively? Like, do you see potential for those in the Farm Bill, or those like on the horizon kind of programs? Or yeah, just to speak to the maybe the urban agriculture components.
Go ahead, Maya.
Okay. Yeah, happy to hop in. I think I personally see huge potential for urban agroforestry in terms of increasing the number of food forests in cities, increasing or urban trees in general, I think are just enormous for a variety of reasons, including mitigating the urban heat island effect, providing just general well-being for communities in terms of mental health benefits, improving air quality, making things cooler in the summer in a world that is increasingly having hotter summers. And so I think that there is huge potential for it. As far as in the Farm Bill, I'm not entirely sure in terms of the programs that we have discussed already today. Primarily just because the bigger program that we talked about, the Conservation Reserve Program, is primarily for not urban contexts. But I am a huge proponent for urban food forests. I volunteer at one in my city, and I love getting to go there. And it's just a really cool space that there's a lot of environmental education happening with young students and adults and all kinds of folks just converging under the canopy of some cherry trees and pawpaw trees. And I think there's just a lot of power in that, both for environmental and climate reasons, as well as just for general quality of life and environmental justice reasons for communities surrounding them. But again, I'll have to think a little bit more on Farm Bill programs and the way that urban food forests and urban agroforestry can fit a little bit more into incentives and programs under the Farm Bill.
Yeah, and we at Xerces, we're doing a lot of work on our own within these spaces through increasingly trying to work with underserved communities and the working with urban ag, producers. And we also have habitat kits throughout the country where people can sign up and get free native plants to put in their community spaces. We don't have that in Iowa, but they do in Wisconsin and California and the Mid-Atlantic region. But we do a focus of ours for this Farm Bill cycle is to increase the payment scenarios for urban producers that are implementing habitat, because they're not really being compensated for how much it costs. And it can be quite expensive. Oftentimes it's smaller scale. So we're using live plants, plugs versus seed, and those have a higher cost to them. So that's, always trying to help make it economically sustainable for growers to implement these practices is really important. Having them available is great, but, actually making it feasible is a whole nother thing.
Awesome. Thank you both for, jumping in on that. I think this series is all about building our better Farm Bill. And I think there are a lot of ways in which we can recognize maybe even what the next Farm Bill will look like, even after the, even though we're in the thick of the 2023 Farm Bill, thinking about what the future possibility could look like, 5 or so years down the line when we're doing this all over again. So I really appreciate you both kind of dreaming in that way and thinking about the programs that already exist creatively. So if anyone else has any questions and wants to jump in with questions, feel free. Otherwise, I might just wrap us up here today. So I'll give folks a little bit of time to do that. Oh, Frankie, go ahead.
Hey everyone, really appreciate what's been shared today. I'm from California. I work on a statewide nutritional program for farmers markets. And I'm just curious what y'all's background was before entering the advocacy implementation on a federal or state level, what your background was and like how one gets into this line of work, and if like either of you have either bachelor's or master's in scientific degrees. Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's degree, which at Xerces, many of our staff actually have master's or doctorates. They are a lot of them are very like research minded. I am not. Data, I can collect the data, but I don't want to like do anything with it. My brain just doesn't really operate that way. But I am thankful enough that I've been able to really be fortunate to kind of have my life go down this path and be where I'm at right now. I have that degree in environmental science. My dad joked when I was growing up that if I really wanted to make a difference in the environment, that I needed to have an environmental science and policy degree, which was actually offered at my school. And I was like, no, that's silly. Who wants to mess around with policy? But now, as I've gotten older, I am so much more passionate and aware, and I'm just like, wow, that is how change happens. That's how it works. Like, oh, dang, he was right. But I don't know. I guess I've always had a passion for what I do. I had a really non-traditional path to where I'm at. I didn't have a lot of resources growing up. But it's certainly been within the adult life that I've just recognized the power of policy, the power of voice at every level. And I'm not an entomologist, although everyone thinks so because I work for the Xerces Society. I did a lot of land management and a lot of grunt work and internships prior to coming on with Xerces, but the private lands field and really working with Farm Bill programs as a partner with NRCS did help me get my foot in the door with Xerces. So it's kind of a daunting thing to think about. But I have a lot of customer service background, so working with people every day is an absolute joy. Yeah, I don't know if I'm even answering your question quite right, but yeah, that's the very, very short story of how I got to where I am.
Yeah, a lot of that, thanks, Sarah. A lot of that I think resonates with my path as well. I have a bachelor's degree in geology and biology. So within my university's earth science department, geology and biology kind of together, and had no background in policy really, just a couple classes in college, and it was not something I saw myself moving into. But as Sarah kind of walked us through, it is just like an enormous area opportunity to actually be moving some things, even though it feels quite different from learning and moving things in a science context. But I think, you know, within advocacy at the federal level versus the state level versus the local level, I think those are all quite different advocacy experiences. And I, so far, have primarily only experienced the federal advocacy experience. And I think that, yeah, it's something I'm continuously just interested in getting a little bit smaller and smaller as I go forward. But happy to talk further about, you know, how folks come in and anything you would want to maybe talk through on that front.
Thanks for that, Maya and Sarah.
Awesome. Any last questions for our panelists today?
I just want to make one more comment. One of the themes that seems to be going across all of our interests and values is, you know, really looking at the use of pesticides. And there is a Agricultural Labeling Uniformity Act that is expected to become part of the Farm Bill. And the concern is that it is actually written in a way to stop local and regional local and state authorities from protecting the health of their residents from pesticides because of the way that they have written it. And so I think it's beyond just putting forward our values and saying like, this is how we can advocate for our values we put into law, but also how do we identify the forces that are working against us and actually undermining the expansion of limiting pesticides. So if Sarah or Maya would like to talk about that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, there could be a lot said there, but yeah, there's all these things we hope for, and then there's these things we're like, oh dear, how about let's not do that. Yeah, I can't, our pesticide team is very in the know about all of those things. But yeah, I love the point that you brought up, that we also need to be thinking about things to be wary of and to be cautious of, and to encourage to not support. And there's often a lot of loopholes with regulation and pesticides, and neonicotinoids still not being regulated as a pesticide. It's just kind of still willy-nilly out there. That's something that we are constantly advocating for, to have regulation with neonicotinoids, which are insecticides, systematic insecticides that go everywhere. They don't stay in one place. So I don't know if I'm really contributing to that comment, but Maya, if you have anything to say.
No, thanks, Sarah. I think this is more in your wheelhouse than it is in mine. I think I just generally agree with the sentiment, but don't have a ton more substance to add.
Yeah, I think that's a huge like a great way to be thinking about what it looks like to be educating ourselves and to be connecting with others and educating, like co-educating, co-learning with others around what like values we have for the Farm Bill, and also ways in which parts of the Farm Bill can be completely counter to those values, and like all of that existing at the same time, because this is such a big piece of legislation. We talked a lot about this in our advocacy section. A lot of the time it can feel like parts of the Farm Bill are contradicting one another, and just being able to understand the way that those different pieces of this very large bill and like very large amount of money that's set aside are working together and also working against each other is really interesting, and it's a lot to wrap our heads around. And so I appreciate being able to pull out areas where we can say, oh, that looks like a good thing that I want to be a part of supporting, which, yeah, both of you did like such a great job of kind of illuminating today. But it makes it actually a lot easier, I think, to weed out all the stuff that doesn't feel like such a good thing, when you know where folks in your network are seeing potential, and just being pretty honest about the potential for that to be for there to be contradictions that come up in Farm Bill funding and things like that. I think that I really appreciate everyone sticking around for such a wonderful conversation. I think we touched on a lot of parts of the Farm Bill, and if it were in our hands, I think we would be off to a great start. But I appreciate the work that y'all are doing in your respective roles in the policy system, and really appreciate folks joining us for this conversation. We'll be adding these recordings to our YouTube channel, and then also posting our or sending a follow-up email with those recordings ahead of them being posted, and you'll get a lot of extra details. I've been writing some notes down, so we'll get some great links to everyone if they are interested in further details about how to get involved with either the ambassador programs or food forests and different bills that are being put through by Xerces Society, supported by Xerces Society, supported by Carbon 180. So appreciate all of that wonderful information. We're going to try to distill it and send it back out to y'all. Our final session of the Farm Bill series will be Tuesday, July 25th, from 12 to 1:30 Central. And that's another session where we'll be talking about the role that farming plays in the Farm Bill and the farmer experience through the lens of soil health in the Farm Bill. So we'll be talking to farmers, we'll be talking about we're talking with American Farmland Trust, and then also with the National Center for Appropriate Technologies. So really excited to have that session kind of round out the final bit of the Farm Bill work that we've been doing this summer. And I'll just drop this link in the chat if folks want to go ahead and register for that session. Otherwise, you can find that on our website. And then all of our last sessions on the Farm Bill with farm worker rights in the Farm Bill and action and advocacy around the Farm Bill are on our YouTube page. And I will add that to the chat. And then folks can go take a look at these and watch them now and later and send them along and share them with your friends. So I think that's all we've got for you. And just thanks again to our wonderful speakers and to Rolando for being our fantastic interpreter for the last few sessions. It's been a lot of policy jargon and ecological jargon to throw at someone, and I appreciate him taking that in stride. So thanks all for being here, and hope to see you at our next session.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, WFAN. Thank you, Rolando.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.